Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our devoted series. Now, we've been walking through the book of James, and can you believe we're already at the end of this study? It's been a powerful journey together, and each chapter of James has challenged us and changed us in practical, everyday ways. Now, before we dig in, let's do a quick review. In chapter 1, James taught us that when we look to God and trust Him during our trials, He uses those challenges to develop and mature us. He says we're to consider it pure joy when we face trials, knowing God is at work, making us complete so that we lack nothing. And then in chapter 2, we learned that faith without works is dead, and that what we believe should be visible through our actions. In chapter 3, we talked about taming the tongue and how our words steer the direction of our lives, and they can either build up or they can burn down. And we've learned that no one can tame the tongue, and that's why we need God's grace to speak words of life and faith. In chapter 4, James turns to relationships, and he called us to humility, to submit to God, to look within, and to surrender our hearts. In chapter 4, he gives us 3 keys to great relationships: humility, submission, and restoration. And now we're in chapter 5, and James brings it all together and teaches us to live every day with the end in mind, ready for God's return. One of my friends used to say, plan your life as if Jesus won't come back for 100 years, but live your life as if he's coming back this week. Now that's the balance James invites us to live in, prepared and present, but always with eternity in view. Now James begins by reminding us that everything on earth is temporary. And he says your gold, your silver are corroded. Now he's not just talking about money, he's talking about misplaced trust. And he's saying, don't anchor your heart on things that will fade. Now he's echoing the words of Jesus in Matthew 16:19, where he says, don't store up for yourself treasures on earth where moth and rust destroy and where thieves break in, but lay up treasures in heaven. Now there's nothing wrong with money or success as long as our vision is on eternity. James says the judge is standing at the door. Now, that's not a threat. It's just a reminder that Jesus is close. So to live your life in light of eternity. And then James says, be patient, brothers and sisters, until the Lord's coming. And he gives 3 examples. He talks about the farmer, the prophet, and Job. Now, the farmer teaches us to trust in God's timing. The prophet shows us to keep speaking truth even when it's costly. And Job reminds us that endurance through suffering produces blessings in the end. It's all about keeping faith and living the faith. Living today with a focus and a purpose through the lens of eternity. But then James pivots to what I believe is one of the richest parts of the chapter in verses 13 and 14. He says, if anyone among you is in trouble, let them pray. Is anyone happy? Let them sing songs of praise. Is anyone sick? Call others to pray for you. Now he's showing us what a life of margin looks like. A life that always turns first towards the Father. Before you panic, pray. Before you post, pause. Before you celebrate, praise. That's the rhythm of a heart anchored in God and a life with margin. Room for the Spirit before the flesh reacts. But then in verse 16, my favorite part, James brings one of the biggest revelations in the whole book. He writes, confess your sins to one another and pray for one another so that you may be healed. When we confess to God vertically, we're forgiven. But when we confess to one another horizontally, we're healed. In other words, you can live forgiven and still never be healed. Healing flows through humility. And when we bring hidden things into the light of grace through confession and community, that's why James ends this entire book talking about restoring those who have wandered, because mature faith doesn't just endure, it restores. So as you talk in your small group tonight, think about this. Where do you need to create margin in your life? So you pray instead of panic, you praise instead of complain. Is there someone you can open up to so you can move from living just forgiven to living healed as well? And how can you live this week as if Jesus really could return at any moment? Let's live ready for his return, steady in trials, strong in prayer, and steadfast in love until we see him face to face. What an amazing journey this has been. I want to thank all the small group hosts and everyone who attended group and made small group a priority. Well done. Enjoy your discussion. It's our last week of small groups, and let's finish this study strong.